What's going on, you guys? TBR here. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to another King of Fighters All-Star video. In today's video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the EX version of Boss Syndrome Orochi. I went ahead and ran him through his paces in several different game modes over the course of the past week, and I just want to go ahead and give you guys my takeaways for this character now that he has gotten buffed, as well as gotten the new change-up EX system added to him. We're going to go ahead and take a look at a few pieces of footage here at the end of the video, and I'll let you guys enjoy that in its entirety. But first, I'm going to give you an introduction and kind of just give you my overall thoughts with the character and some of my takeaways after playing around with him. But before we go ahead and get into all of that and more, make sure if you guys haven't already done so, you smash that like button and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get into the video. Cue the intro. Alright, you guys, so like always with these videos, I'll go ahead and give you my takeaways and my thoughts on the character, and then I'll go ahead and get into a little bit of footage and let you guys enjoy that. But I've had about a week now to play around with the EX version of Boss Syndrome Orochi, and I just want to go ahead and first talk about my takeaways with him. So of course, first and foremost, post-buff, this character is far, far superior to the original version of this character. For those of you who haven't been around the channel for very long, I did do a spotlight on this character way back in the day, about a year ago at this point, and I caught a little bit of flack at the time when I did that review because I didn't necessarily give this character the highest score in the world. I wasn't even then a huge fan of what his kit looked like, even though at the time there was far less competition for this character, and still to this day I'm still not a giant fan of what all he is trying to accomplish. But at the same time, after these buffs, this character is far, far better, and definitely in line with some of the more top-end characters in the game, even though I don't necessarily think that he's going to be touching that Uber tier, except for one caveat, which we'll talk about. So when it comes to this character, of course, he got a ton of buffs. We've already gone over what those buffs were. If you want to check those out, the link will be in the description. The biggest thing that I find with this character right now that really does make him stand out is going to be a couple of his cores, and it's really just going to be these two cores here. So of course the first one here is going to be the King of Fighters 97. Now this one here is going to decrease your active skill cooldowns by 0.2 seconds when attacking targets affected by Starlight. Now of course one of the biggest things to happen for this character was he was given dot. Originally this character did not have a dot. He is pretty famous for being a character that didn't have a dot, and therefore for the longest time he really wasn't necessarily going to be a character that you found wanting to use in a lot of different modes. And now this gives him a lot of versatility. It gives him at least use cases in the game, whereas before, really this was a character that outside of things such as PVE and maybe an isolated instance here and there, he really wasn't going to shine very much. But because he does have Starlight and he does have this core now, these two things help him out massively. He's also going to have this part of the core here where he is going to gain so much power so quickly that you are going to be able to spam finishers very well. Unfortunately, his finishers aren't necessarily as good as some of the top Uber tier characters in the game, but we'll kind of talk about that momentarily. Other things in here, of course, with the Orochi syndrome, he has that 70% chance to reset the cooldown of all of his blast active skills upon landing. Something I'm not going to pronounce. So when it comes to that, really the big thing there is the fact that he is going to be able to keep up the pressure, and because he does have that amazing power charge, you're going to see, especially when we take a look at Lunatic guild rate against Omega Rugal, his shield shred is absolutely incredible as it sits, and being able to have that reset there is going to make that to where you can kind of just loop Omega Rugal as long as you're quick enough and he shows you a little bit of mercy, which is definitely necessary for this character, considering the fact that one of the biggest reasons why he isn't necessarily as good as he could be is because this character does not have a shield, and therefore even though he does have things such as damage immunity and hyper armor, this character is not going to be able to take a lot of hits, and you will notice that. So a lot of times what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go in and you're going to need to use like a healing striker or so on and so forth if you have a lower awakening version of this character, because he cannot take a hit. So that is something you definitely want to keep in mind. Now, another big thing he has here is he increases his active skill damage dealt to targets affected by Starlight by 55%. This is going to be a big part of the reason why this character's overall damage output is so powerful right now. You'll see that in the Lunatic guild raid footage, and there's going to be a couple of reasons why I point that out, and we'll kind of get to that. Now, other things here, if we take a look at the skills, of course we have this EX skill. Now right now I have Shout on mine. Shout, in my opinion, of the options, and we'll kind of take a look at the core board so I can show you guys what I'm working with. For my money, Shout is the better of the two options for PvE. You know, with this character, of course, there is Metamorph. Metamorph is decent. It's especially very good for other modes in the game that aren't necessarily going to be your PvE modes, that are going to be kind of your classical modes like your guild raid and so on. The problem is outside of some very, very isolated use cases, this really isn't necessarily that useful in PvE, nor that necessary. So this isn't something that I really would invest in. Instead, what I went ahead and did is I got Shout. Now, of course, we've seen footage of Shout at this point. You need 2 PG bars in order to use it. You guys have seen people kind of cheese this skill in things such as bossing and mobbing and so on and so forth, specifically mobbing being the biggest one. Unfortunately, when it comes to mobbing, the biggest reason why a skill would be really useful for mobbing would really be for things like time attack, because time attack is the most important mobbing mode in the entire game. Unfortunately, because this needs 2 PG bars and you need to be spamming your finishers to stop the clock because of course it's time attack, this isn't necessarily more than anything that's just a gimmick at that point, in my opinion, for that mode. You can use it here and there, but I wouldn't go in just spamming it on every wave or anything like that, unless you just enjoy sacrificing rubies for the fun of it. So really, I do think that this is a good skill. I don't think it's anything super broken though. You know, outside of that, if you want to use it in things like story mode, epic quests, so on and so forth, of course, against mobs, it can definitely be useful, but I really just don't see it as being anything that's overly powerful. So that is something that I do want to point out there. Not necessarily anything that I would go crazy with, but that's just my opinion. Now, when it comes to other things in here, of course, you guys can see what I went ahead and invested my stats into. So you can see that I went ahead and just heavily invested in attack, and I did go ahead and reset this. I had originally done something a little bit different where I had a bit more of a spread into penetration, but I went ahead and changed that. And then I went ahead and invested in these skills here. So that's really what we got going on there. As far as the core board is concerned, and this definitely helps, in my opinion, like I've told you guys, this part of this overall EX system, being able to increase your stats, is the most important part. So that's really what we got going on there for me. Now, when it comes to the skills, now we talked about the EX skill. To me, it's just kind of there. I rarely ever use it. If I ever find more use cases for it that are really all that interesting, or if that ever crops up anywhere, I'll let you guys know. For me right now, it's just kind of one of those things where I can use it if I need it, but it's rarely ever something I feel like I need to use. Otherwise, when it comes to the regular skills though, the S1 does now have immune to damage for 4 seconds. This is really, really strong. This helps him out a lot with his survivability. He really needs that. Unfortunately though, it would have been nice to see maybe a shield or something on this kit instead of this immunity to damage, just because this character not having a shield for PvE really does hamper his overall performance, like I mentioned, specifically for his overall survival rate. Other things in here, if we take a look, you know, on the S2, you are going to have the ability to ignore the target's guard. You're going to be able to increase the target's damage received. Pretty good stuff. You know, overall, not necessarily a skill that is going to be boasting anything too absolutely busted or stupid, but still a pretty good skill overall. And then finally, on the S3, this is of course going to be your source of hyper armor, and this is also going to be a airborne and standing interrupt with a 70% chance to remove the target's hyper armor or shield upon landing a hit, which is really just a PvP skill at that point. So, you know, in general, looking at this stuff, this character is in a pretty good spot. You guys are going to be able to see the performance against Lunatic difficulty against Omega Rugal, where I would honestly venture to say that this character, for his shield shred and his overall damage output, the combination of those two things as a Starlight user is one of the better Starlight users in the game at this point. You know, when it comes to Omega Rugal, of course, the biggest thing you want to do is try to drop that shield as often as possible and be able to spam skills, being that he does have the ability to lower his cooldowns on on his cores, you're going to be able to do that very easily, and you'll be able to specifically see on my awakening spam how well this character is able to perform in that regard. I am putting up a butt ton of damage with this character against Omega Rugal in Lunatic difficulty, and that's even with something that I have told you guys already, which is the fact that my stones for this character are absolute ass. So if we take a look at my stones here, this was a stone slave character for me for the past year, so that's why. And right now, as I've already outlined, I don't want to use unpairing kits on anybody until Street Fighter, so I can kind of see what we're looking at there. And even then, I don't know that I would want to go ahead and do that. But as you guys can see, I do have the Boss Syndrome Volume 3 Circle Stone on here. This is going to be one that gives power, so pretty whatever. This one here is going to be good for him though, because this is going to help with his Starlight and its double attack. Still though, I would rather have some of the other Boss Syndrome stones at that point. And then as you can see, this one here is going to decrease damage received. Now, you guys are going to notice how much damage this character takes against Lunatic difficulty in Omega Rugal. And the problem is if I didn't have the stone on this character, he'd probably be dead far before that fight ended. So, you know, that is something you have to keep in mind. And then of course, when it comes to my Star and my Moon stones, I really don't have a lot going on here. So when I had said earlier that this character is going to be able to put himself up with kind of the more top end of the meta when it comes to damage, but not quite uber tier, I had said that there was a bit of a caveat to that, and the caveat being that if you fully invest into this character, like if you were to have this character, you know, Awaken level 5, EX, with full stones that are perfect stones for him, this character would probably put so much damage up it wouldn't even be funny against Lunatic difficulty. You're going to see that I'm doing like 2.6, 2.7 billion damage solo against Omega Rugal with this build, and this build, like I said, is ass. So in general, this is a character that I feel like could easily be pushing, you know, 3+ billion, maybe even 4 billion if you really overinvest into him. But even then, with his survival rate being low, with the fact that his finisher, something I should point out here, his finisher, specifically his 3PG finisher, gets interrupted constantly. It's not necessarily the best thing in the world. So that is another thing to kind of keep in mind. It will get interrupted quite often against guild raid bosses. So in general, you know, other things with this character, he's always had kind of wonky animations. So for things such as mobbing and bossing and so on, bossing isn't too bad. It's actually pretty easy. Mobs can sometimes be a bit of an issue. His XY axis isn't necessarily the best. His basic strings aren't necessarily great either. So there are several different things with this character that caused me to think that, you know, honestly, you guys, this is going to be a character that, you know, originally we needed basically 7 memories to fully awaken a character. Now we need essentially 10 if you consider that you want to EX a character like this. And so for 10 memories, just to get this character to a point where, especially if you want them to be where I'm about to kind of mention, you would need to fully invest and overclock the character. You know, well, I'm talking all stones, all perfect cards, everything, which by the way, if you guys want to see my cards, I'm still tinkering around with them, but this is what I use in this video. When it comes to overclocking this character, you're going to notice that he's going to be touching the same performance as the Uber tiers, which is great and all, but that's a lot of investment. So for my money, I don't necessarily think that this would necessarily be worth it unless you're a super fan of the character. You know, if you overclock him, like I said, you're going to be getting Uber tier performance on damage, but I really do not think that 10 memories is really going to be making that worth it at the end of the day. At that point, you might be better off just kind of saving for another character again, unless he's a favorite. If he's your favorite, always build your favorites. It's not like he's bad, he's amazing. Problem is, you have to compare him to the Uber tier and then everybody else. And I don't think that he's Uber tier unless you just fully invest into him. If you fully invest into him, he's close to that, especially on damage, he's Uber tier. As far as performance goes, utility goes, no, not at all. So, you know, I don't necessarily think this is a character that's worth 10 memories, but at the same time, I don't want to understate that he is really strong and really, really good. It's just that I wouldn't be going crazy at that point. So those are just my opinions on this character. Again, he's in a far, far better place than he was before. Orochi fans should be very happy with his overall performance. The problems with him are pretty big though. You know, he does have survival issues. He does need to be overclocked and overbuilt in order to be able to touch the Uber tier of characters that we've seen since his original release. And in general, his finisher does leave a lot to be desired for me. He doesn't have a shield that hurts, again, that 0.1 about his survivability. So, you know, there are things about this character that I love, and there's things about this character I don't like. And that's going to be the same for any character in the game. But at the end of the day, I do think that Boss Syndrome Orochi, the EX version of him, is very, very good. I just don't necessarily think that he is, you know, the be-all, end-all of the meta. But anyway, you guys, I'm going to let you enjoy some of the footage. I'm also going to have a spider robot clip in here, and what I went ahead and did is, like I always do, I just try to see how much damage I can put up against spider robot. Like I said, this is going to be the build that you'll see me use in both of the clips you're about to see. You know, just for comparison's sake, you guys have seen me with my Boss Syndrome Nameless, for example, do like 425 million damage against the spider robot using Boss Syndrome Nameless. You guys have seen me do things such as 388 million damage with my SS King, and so on and so forth. And of course, they had perfect stones, or at least close to perfect stones. Not quite perfect, I shouldn't say that. But they definitely had a much better stone build than this character, and he was still able to put up very, very respectable numbers there. So again, his damage is not the problem. His damage is phenomenal. He just has a few other issues. So that's pretty much all I got to say about him. Like I said, those are just my opinions. You guys can let me know yours in the comments section down below. Enjoy the footage of Boss Syndrome Orochi EX in action, and I will see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe on your way out. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.